Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Shaun Eli.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorianne. I am that gal from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. We'd like to welcome you to our Lift Your Story podcast.
Our guest today is Shaun Eli, and he is a stand-up comedian, and he has headlined shows on 5 continents. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yes,
Sure. I suppose these days I have to say 5 continents in person.
That's right.
Not virtual.
Well, probably virtually the same 5, but
Oh, is it? Okay.
but actually in person.
So, Shaun, how did you get into comedy?
By accident. I was on a date with somebody. I started late in life. I started around 40. And I was on a date with somebody, a first date, and she said, "You're funny. You should do stand-up comedy." And I said, "I have no interest in being a performer. I have friends who are actors. I just don't understand the draw." And I was in the 5th grade play and hated it. And I vowed never to do that again. And then she said, "Well, you should try a comedy class," because she had just taken, it was her dream to try it. And she had just taken a comedy class and said I should come see her class perform. And they were funnier than I thought they'd be. And I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I can do this. I took the class and started performing. And then 6 years later, I said, I don't want to go into an office anymore.
And you made it up to the Jay Leno show.
Not performing, writing. That actually started before I was performing. I started submitting jokes to him for his Tonight Show monologue. So I was selling him jokes freelance. And I did that for, I think, 19 years.
Wow. Really? So
That was fun.
Is writing jokes and you just write them and send them in and they tell you, hey, we like this, we're going to pay you for it, or how's that work?
They wouldn't say it. They would just, if they used it, they paid me. And I think the first joke I sold, I didn't even realize I'd sold it until a check came. And then I'm like, I wonder what that was. And I went back through all of my notes. And I'm like, oh, that was the joke. And if I remember right, the joke was, this is, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Sinead O'Connor, singer, went on Saturday Night Live with a picture of the Pope and said, "Fight the power." And she tore up the picture. And my joke was something like, the next week, atheists went on Saturday Night Live and tore up blank sheets of paper. So that was the first joke I sold. It was kind of dumb, but, he's got a quota of dumb jokes too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty nice going there and getting a check and going, wow, I got paid for this.
Yep.
Must be fun watching too and knowing, hey, that's my joke.
Yeah. Actually, the biggest thing was not just that I'd sold him jokes, but that when he was interviewed in Fortune magazine, he quoted one of my jokes and said it's the kind of joke he likes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it says in your bio, you're kind of known for smart comedy.
People think, I wouldn't say smart comedy so much as dumb, not the lack of dumb comedy.
Well, I was just going to ask you, what exactly is smart comedy?
Well, I was working with a few comics at a show, and we were interviewed in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I said, well, it's not like we have jokes about Voltaire. And one of the comics in the show was like, I have a Voltaire joke. But it's just, I don't perpetuate stupid stereotypes. I don't make fun of people that, can't fight back. So I may make fun of a public figure, but I'm not going to make fun of the homeless.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah. And clean, and something that I think I have 2 Supreme Court references of all my jokes. So it requires at least knowing a little bit about how things work.
Well, it's funny you mentioned clean, because I know I've seen a lot of stuff where there's kind of a split on comedians, and I'll just use like Eddie Murphy, those type guys, versus somebody like Jeff Allen, and some people won't go the dirty route, and they, like Bill Cosby was one that said, you don't need to do all that.
Yeah, and look what happened to him.
Yeah, but there are those that just do not do that, and I think probably in today's time, I would think that more people would be leaning towards not the critical, not the dirty stuff. Would you agree
It's,
with that?
it's harder. I mean, it's for a couple of reasons. One is we're used to talking, especially these days, used to talking about subjects that used to be taboo. And we're used to cursing. So some people, it's hard for them not to think that way. And I think also when you start out in comedy, and again, here's some of the wisdom that comes with starting at 40 instead of 20. I can easily tell the difference between people laughing out of release of tension because they were shocked and people who were laughing because it's a genuinely funny concept. So it's easy to get the cheap laughs by being dirty. Now, I'm not saying dirty comedy is inherently dumb. There's a lot of smart comedy that happens to be dirty, but my brain just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And
just as an example, I was watching a comedian's Netflix special this morning when I was working out, and one of his, and he, the subjects weren't filthy, but he was kind of dirty, and one of his jokes had the F word in it. And I looked at it and I thought, and sometimes it's a spice, a little bit helps emphasize the point. But I think that joke would have worked better had he not cursed, because he just would have gotten to the punchline quicker. He didn't need the emphasis of it.
Yeah.
Christine, I was listening to some comedians because we've had a couple on, and I know Mark Breslin from way back, and he was talking about, there's some comedians that have been doing comedy, through the 70s, 80s, and 90s that have to go back, and if they put some of them up on YouTube, they have to remove them because of all these, the PC thing, politically correct. Yet there was a time where that was, it's understood you're a comedian, that's going to be part of the routine. But it's become a lot tougher, I think, for comedians in regards to that.
Well, in some ways, I'm fighting with colleagues because they're saying you can say anything. I'm like, you can say anything, but you've got to be willing to defend it. And if you're saying something that other people think is inappropriate, well, you decided to say it. So if your joke is perpetuating, when I started out, I was doing a show, and the headliner was, I was 40 something, and the headliner was 25, and that's too young to have the experience, both in life and as a performer, to be headlining a show. And it showed because some of his jokes were just inherently racist, and the audience liked it. And I realized the reason the audience was laughing at that was because he was the authority figure, because he was on stage. He was saying stuff they believed, and seeing the authority figure say stuff that they believed made them feel better about their racism.
Yeah. They kind of validated it to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to be that guy. I have some jokes that make fun of stereotypes.
I guess there's two schools of thought too, because I mean, if you're offended, then don't listen to it. I mean, we have that option to turn somebody off if there's a comedian that we find to be, out of our comfort zone. So to force everybody to not have their choice of words, is interesting. It was just like the podcast. Somebody says, do you edit your podcast? And there were a few podcasters that said no. They go, well, you're hurting my ears, but you don't have to listen to it. You don't have to hurt your ears.
When Howard Stern first went on the radio, my mother said to me, have you heard of this guy, Howard Stern? I said, yes. And she said, what do you think? And I said, well, why are you asking? And she said, well, he was talking about the most, and this was regular radio at the time. And she said he was talking about the most offensive things and saying the most offensive things. And I said, what did you do? She said, I changed the radio station. What do you think I did? So absolutely, if you know you're going to see somebody, I mean, it's not 1970 anymore. If you're going to see a comedian at a comedy club, there's the internet. You can research all you want about them. And if they're horrible, insulting, filthy comics, and you think that's going to bother you, don't go see them.
Yeah.
Sure.
I agree. So what was one of your worst experiences on stage?
Well, I've had a few.
Or do you have one?
Everybody, we don't love to talk about it. I mean, everybody has a bad day at work. But I think one of them was I was hired to do a singles event. And the woman said, do you know what, I don't know if the two of you are married or dating, but it's not even the trend anymore. But a few years ago, there was a trend towards something called speed dating, which is, I'll explain for your audience briefly. Basically have, let's say, 10 or 15 women each sitting at their own table, and the equivalent number of guys. And each guy sits in front of one of them, and they talk for 5 minutes, and the guys for some reason, the guys get up and they move over. And And the women and the men each check a box as to which of the people they met for 5 minutes they wanted to meet. And if the two of them check the same, same people, then they get each other's contact information. And the woman said they're doing speed dating. And I said, when am I going to perform? She said, oh, you'll do a half hour and then we'll have the speed dating. And I said, no, people want to meet each other. They don't want to show up and listen to me talk. And by the way, what age is this for? And she said, oh, all ages. And you can't do speed dating with all ages. You can't make a 20-year-old and an 80-year-old suffer talking to each other for 5 minutes. So then but I needed the work at the time. And I got there and she said, oh, well, we're not doing speed dating. It was too complicated. We're just going to have you talk and then the people are going to mingle. And I'm like, they don't want to listen to me. They want to meet each other. Comedy is not background music. They have to pay attention. They can't be ogling each other. And she said, oh, it'll be fine. And I did the best I could to hold their attention. What I should have done, I think, is what's known as crowd work, where you talk to the audience and you're like, oh, who are you? What do you do for a living? Oh, you're a dentist. Let me see if we can find a guy with bad teeth for you. Something. That's what I should have done. But I was too new to know that. And I did the best I could. And afterwards, a guy came over to me and he looked at me and he just said, you need better material. And I went off on him. I said, you know what? I've sold jokes to 3 late night TV hosts. I'm a good writer. My material is good. What I needed was a polite, attentive audience. And you're proof I didn't have that. Why would you come up to somebody and say such an obnoxious thing? Yeah. You don't deserve to meet anybody because you're a horrible person. So at least I felt better about it afterwards, but it was a tough slog.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what was your best?
Oh, almost every other experience is the best experience. I mean, I get paid to make people laugh for a living. I can't think of a better job.
Yeah.
So I will say this, I work in theaters and I work in comedy clubs. And you go to a theater and you drive up and somebody tells you where to park and there's a guy with a headset and he's like, the artists are here. And they usher you in and they walk you to a green room, which is bigger than my living room sometimes. And they hand us menus and they say, tell us what you'd like to eat and when you want the food to be served. And we'll come get you, 5 minutes before you go on stage. If there's anything else you need, just let us know. And that's a theater. And a comedy club, you go in and they say, stand in the corner and make sure you stay out of the waitress's way and we'll come get you when it's your turn. And either one is great because either way, I know that when they come get me, it's time to make people laugh.
So have you ever done a show and afterwards someone come up to you and go, oh man, I'm so glad I came. You just made my day. I've had a horrible day. And your show, man, it just made me feel much better about, my day.
Oh, it happens all the time. I mean, people say, I had a bad day at work and I feel so much better, or I lost my job or something like that. Or, my girlfriend just broke up with me and my friends took me out and I realized she's a jerk and I'm better off without her. So actually the best one was I was doing a show in New York. We have shows. Well, not lately, but they have shows every month for patients and their families at Sloan Kettering, which is a cancer hospital. And those are really, really hard shows for comedians to do because you don't get laughs because the people there are like, they have tubes in them and they're in pain and there's machines that are beeping and they all just look miserable. And even if they're not patients, but their family, they're just with loved ones who are miserable. So you don't really get any laughter. And so every comic thinks, oh my God, I'm bombing. This is terrible. But after one show, a guy came up to me and he said something like, God bless you for coming. This is the first time in 3 months I've seen my wife smile. And I'm like, okay, that's as good as laughter. That's, you don't get that very often.
That's going to be very rewarding.
Yeah.
That's almost better than money.
Well, I didn't get paid for it, so it had to be.
Well, yeah, I guess it was. Yeah. I guess it was.
So have you been performing virtually during this COVID time? I know it's been a real shift for comedians in particular because of the type of, the audience interaction you usually need. So
it's weird. It's, everybody talks about we need the audience interaction for our timing, which is true. What everybody doesn't realize is the audience needs the audience. Because I say the secret to comedy is 100 people in a room that holds 70. Because you need the laughter echo and you need to hear other people laughing around you to make you comfortable for laughing out loud. And when you're in, let's say, outdoors and the laughter just dissipates, it's not the same. You need to hear other people laughing. And the problem with doing shows on Zoom is you often don't hear the laughter, or worse, I tell a joke, there's a delay of about a second. So I tell a joke, you don't hear it for a second. Then maybe it's a couple of seconds before you laugh because you don't hear the other people laughing. Because usually, frequently in a comedy club, the joke is subtle and it takes a little bit of time to figure it out. But as soon as somebody starts laughing, everybody else gets it and starts laughing. So it may take a couple of seconds for you to laugh, which gets everybody else laughing. But there's a second delay, and it's maybe 5 seconds before it gets back to the comedian. And the trouble is, we're not used to pausing for 5 seconds waiting for laughter.
Mhm.
If we don't have a laugh in a second or two, we figure, oh, nobody's going to laugh, and we keep going. So it took comedians a few months to figure out that it's a different medium and you have to play it differently. And it's really hard to just have a punchline and shut up and wait for laughs.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, I have to admit this. I've never been to a comedy club.
Where in Texas are you?
Dallas.
Okay, I know there's comedy clubs in Dallas.
Oh, yeah, there are. Now, I was wanting to go one time, and I can't remember who it was to see, but it was sold out. Couldn't get in. But that's always one of the things I've wanted to do is actually go to a comedy club and see somebody up close.
All right, I'm going to
Okay.
have to, when we're done, I'm going to have to go to the comedy clubs in Dallas and see if I can find a show that I recommend.
Okay, great.
And if not, then I'm just going to have to get booked in Dallas.
That'd be awesome.
I was thinking the same thing, just get booked in Dallas and then send him an invitation.
Yeah, no
I can
kidding.
work on that.
That'd be awesome.
They're
Um,
great. I love comedy clubs. I mean, when I turned 40, that was it. I said, I need to go to a comedy club because this is just, make me laugh. I'm turning 40. No, it was just, and the interaction is hilarious. I mean, when the comedians will pick out one person in the crowd, it even makes it even better because that person's always embarrassed. Well, most of the time anyway.
Well, I'm not fond of that actually as a comedian because that audience member may or may not be having a good time, and you don't know it because they may be all smiles but still miserable. And when I started in comedy, I would ask people, have you ever been to a comedy club? And frequently they would say, I used to go all the time, but I stopped because the comedian was mean to me or my friend, and I never went back. So I tell comics, I work with new comics sometimes, and I say, if the club's half empty today, it's because somebody was a jackass the night before, and those people are never coming back to the club. Why do you make these your customers?
Mhm.
It's one thing if they start it, if they instigate something, then sure, unleash your full wrath if you need to get them to quiet down. But to just pick on somebody in the front row for absolutely, it's different if I say, what do you do for a living? Like the dentist comment I had.
Yeah.
That's not making fun of dentists.
No.
But if you make fun of the audience member, you're being a mean person.
I think you're right though. It's the extent. I mean, if it's done in fun and games and it's not offensive, then I find it entertaining. But you're right. If it got to the point where it would be offensive, then that wouldn't make me too happy. No.
I mean, there are some people who say, I want to sit in the front row. I hope I get picked on. But nobody knows who they are in advance. It's not like the club has a seating chart.
Yeah. Do you often have trouble with hecklers?
I don't. And, I learned this, and I don't know why most comics don't know this or they don't care. Well, first of all, we mostly don't want hecklers. It's an interruption. We know what we're going to say out there, and we don't want to be distracted. But there are some comics who are fine with it, and some comics who, I think we brought it on ourselves as a profession. Because if you interrupt a play or a musical, they throw you the hell out. But if you interrupt a comedian, it's sort of accepted behavior, even though it shouldn't be. And well, I shouldn't say it's accepted behavior. The fact is the clubs aren't throwing people out unless it gets out of hand. But I think I discovered this early. If you dress a little bit better than the other comics, people don't talk back to you nearly as much. So right now I'm in a polo shirt. I just have it's a collar, but it's not a button-down shirt. I'm wearing you can't see, I'm wearing nice jeans and I'm wearing shoes. I would get so much less talk back dressed like this than if I were in a t-shirt and sneakers. But
That's
that
interesting.
said,
Yeah.
we know how to deal with hecklers. We sort of learn what category they fit into because there are a few different types of hecklers. So we make it sound like a dialogue, even though it's not. And some people are so drunk, they think it's a conversation. They talk back to you and they mean no harm, but they're just trashed. And you deal with that very differently from somebody who's interrupting you because they think they should be the center of attention.
Yeah, I think that'd be, that would be, to me, it'd be disruptive, because I think pretty much when you're doing your routine, it's kind of a flow, isn't it? And then all of a sudden somebody's putting you over here in left field, you're trying to get back on track, and then here it comes again, another left field,
Well, and there are times that somebody interrupts and I deal with it, and then I'm like, where was I? And always somebody in the audience would be like, you were talking about shoes or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. But I was doing a show. I have a joke in my act where I talk about, well, the joke is my girlfriend and I get along great. We just have one minor incompatibility. I like sex in the morning. She likes sex with other guys. And then I say, it's just a joke. She doesn't like sex with other guys. She doesn't like sex at all. And then somebody in the back row at this theater yelled, she doesn't like sex with you. And I said, just so we're clear, that is not my girlfriend. That is my girlfriend's new girlfriend. And that sort of, put an end to things, and I could keep going. But yeah, sometimes we get distracted. And I imagine there are times that, you have a routine and you have stuff you want to talk about, and then somebody distracts you and you just jump to a couple of minutes later because you forgot about all the stuff in between, or it interrupts the rhythm and you can't keep going. So you got to just abandon what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've got a really tight, that's one thing I do know from what we've talked about, is the time constraints pretty tight for comedians too. I mean, they might say, okay, so you've got a 5 minute and that's all you've got. Like, you can't go past it.
Right. I mean, and in the theater shows I do, it's not that big a deal. If the show's 90 minutes and it turns out to be 93 or 94, it's not the end of the world. But if you're in a comedy club and they have 3 shows that night, and let's say there's a 7:30, a 9:30, and an 11:30, and the club has to, at 9 o'clock, the 7:30 show ends, they've got to clean everything, right? They've got to empty the tables. They've got to clean things. They've got to get the audience to pay their bills and get out the door. Then they've got to seat everybody else, and they want to take the first round of drink orders before the show starts. That's tight timing. And if you go off by a couple of minutes, that's one problem. The other problem is, in a place like New York City, where you have a dozen full-time comedy clubs, you may have a comedian doing, 5 or 10 shows a night, and they're going back and forth. And if you delay them by 4 or 5 minutes, it may throw off the schedule. So they'll be like, oh, Lorianne's not here yet. Okay, then we're going to put the next comic up. And then Lorianne comes in 5 minutes later, and we're like, you can go after the guy. We put up Roy. You can go after Roy. And Lorianne says, I can't because I got to be somewhere else in a half hour.
Yeah.
Well, the time constraints are worse on TV, aren't they?
Yeah, TV, you know how much time you have. I think if you're 20 seconds over doing a spot on the Tonight Show, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think they'll just cut things, but and then again, they edit it, so they can speed things up or slow things down or cut out a few seconds of laughter if they have to. I don't think they do, but I think that's a possibility.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they tell you to do 5 minutes, you're not doing 8.
Yeah. I mean, because I saw somebody said, you go out there, you get on that X, and you start, and in 5, and they got a clock down there. When it hits 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever, you're supposed to be done and out of there for the next person.
Well, I remember in the old days of the Tonight Show, I don't know if they still do this, but they would tell you how much time you have. And if you were running over, the band would just, as soon as you hit the punch, let's say they give you 5 minutes. If you got a laugh at the 5 minute mark, the band would start playing, even if you had more that you were planning to do.
Yeah. That was your cue to get out of there.
Yeah, basically.
So do you or I understand a lot of comedians, they get together after hours, early in the morning after all their shows, and that's their camaraderie, and they have maybe go out to dinner or go out and have a drink and talk about each other's shows and stuff. Do you do a lot of that?
Nobody's inviting me. Where are these things being held?
Really?
Sometimes it really depends. People, I think it was more like that in the old days, and now people are like, I'm done, I want to go home. Because especially if you have somebody at home, you want to get there. But certainly backstage, if I'm doing shows at a theater, the show may be, let's say, 8 to 9:30, and we get there at 7. So we got from 7 to 8 to socialize. And there's some comedians who are just like, leave me alone. I just want to be on my own until it's time to go up. But other comedians just, it's like hanging out at work when you have no work to do, just waiting.
So you said that you've been on 5 continents. So how does that work when you go and travel? Do you stay in a place and do several shows, or are you bouncing around from one city to another while you're out there?
Either one, it depends on how it's organized. Like when I was in South Africa, there were 3 comedy clubs, 1 in Cape Town and 2 in Johannesburg. And so I stayed in Cape Town for a week, and then I went to Johannesburg for a week and worked at the other 2 clubs. When I was in New Zealand, there were no real comedy clubs in the South Island. So what I did was just my opening act drove me around, and every night was a different city. And I use the term city loosely because as an American, a place with, 25,000 people is not exactly a city, but if that's what they had, that's what they had. So when I was in Bangkok, I was in Thailand, and they have a full-time 7-day-a-week comedy club in Bangkok. So I spent a week there, and I did other shows when I was there, but every night I was at that club.
Where was your favorite place out of all the continents to perform?
As far as performing, I think Ireland was the best place to perform. For me, they just loved me in Ireland. South Africa was a great place to visit, but it was really hard for me to just stand up there. They just did not get my sense of humor as much.
Interesting, but is American humor accepted widely in other countries, in your experience?
I don't know what American humor would be. I mean, it's a big, vast country. So what I think of as like a New York Jewish sense of humor didn't go over well in South Africa, but it worked in Ireland. And I don't know, it's just different cultures. Yeah. And I was surprised by South Africa because I thought, it's a Western country, it's an English-speaking country. They get everybody gets American movies and TV, but I thought they were going to be like us. And the country, somebody explained to me, the country was basically isolated during apartheid. So they became very insular and nationalistic. And most South African comedians mainly talk about South African subjects. Right. So somebody coming in talking about, going to the wine bar with his date was not particularly, what they were used to hearing.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. So how can our listeners reach out to you, Shaun?
Oh, great. I will definitely give you a plug. My website is brainchampagne.com. And I picked that because most comedians' URLs are just their name.com, and nobody would remember Shaun Eli or spell it correctly. So I wanted something people would remember. And it seems to have worked because people have come up to me and said, hey, are you Brain Champagne? And I'm like, it's not my name, but I'm the person you're thinking of. I mean, if your last name is Champagne, would you name your kid Brain? I think that would be weird. But there's not just comedy videos on my website. There's actually over 50,000 words worth of comedy content there, which is a lot of jokes.
Wow.
Excellent. I was going to say, though, some people, like when you said Brain Champagne, do you know how many times people misspell the name Brian as Brain?
Yeah. And the other way around. I've had people say, oh, your website is Brian Champagne, or they'll write to me like, hey, Brian. And I'm like, no, I'm not Brian.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Some people might think that it was like backwards, but yeah. No, I love the name, and you're right that people are more likely to remember that than I was thinking about changing my last name because it's so boring to make it something like that people remember, right?
Lorianne Champagne works.
There you go. Beautiful. So yeah, well, definitely thanks again for being here. We really appreciate your time and the insights on comedy.
Yeah, it was great to meet you.
Thanks, it's nice meeting you. Happy to come back.
Well, thank you, definitely.
We'll probably maybe reach back out to you like maybe in 6 months and see what's been going on with you.
All right, and Roy, I'm going to find a comedy show for you in Dallas.
Okay. Next time.
Give me a heads up. Yeah, give me a heads up, and then I'll make it an excuse to go meet Roy in person because we've never almost did last September, but then because of COVID. Yeah.
Well, Roy, if you have a house of worship or a corporation or a charity you want me to do a show for, just let me know.
There you go.
Okay. Great.
Perfect.
I'll give you the friends and family discount.
All right, Shaun. Thanks a
All
lot
right.
for being on with us. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you
It
very
was
much.
lovely talking to you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.